Hi, everybody, again. The discoid fossils of the Ediacaran are, especially those relatable to Aspidella and its synonyms, are the most common of Ediacaran macrofossil sites, and in some places the only fossils found. There's recently been a lot of interest in studying them, but a lot of their features have remained sort of mysterious. But using very well-preserved fossils from the Mackenzie Mountains, we're able to piece together the ins and outs of Ediacaran discs. Our study area was here in, how does this work? Yeah, that map up there.
We do have a point there.
Oh, okay, excellent, thank you. So, Northwest Territories of Canada. They're in the informal dune beds at Dececchi Brook North. The Dececchi Brook North exposure starts with the sheepbed formation and grades up through the dune beds into the Game Trail, Blue Flower, and Risky Formation, all Ediacaran deposits, with notable unconformity at the top of the Risky Formation that includes the Ediacaran-Cambrian boundary, and these gray sandstones you see in the background are actually the Cambrian systems themselves. The dune beds themselves are deep water deposits, as indicated by the sediment sizes and the presence of turbidites and contorites through more than 1 kilometer of section with no shallow water deposits. We have paleocurrent data to show, in fact, these contorites and turbidites at perpendicular directions, as you can see right here. The fossils themselves belong to the Avalon assemblage, as many of you have probably recently been to Mistaken Point and Bonavista and other places around here. So these are same sort of deep water locality dominated by Rangimorphs as far as frondose forms go, including Charnia, Beothucus, Fractifusus, and we of course have the discs such as Hemilura and Aspidella, and we see a reconstruction of it here. Once again, very classic sort of Avalon assemblage in the deep water here in this painting by Peter Trussler. Now, the discs themselves we studied here are of 3 main taxa, including Aspidella, probably one of, if not the most common discs in the Ediacaran, the synonym for many different discoid taxa described previously. It's a wide morphological variability, originally thought to be biological in origin, now believed largely to be taphonomic, the same body under different taphonomic schemes. We also have Eoporpita, which is a lobate disc. It's very rare here, and which is common for Eoporpita and types like it worldwide. It's rare, and where it is found, it's a small component of the biota. And we also have one example of Hemilura here, which is a ray-bearing disc, and examples from Newfoundland showed us that it is, in fact, the holdfast for Prima candelabrum, whose frond escaped preservation. Aspidella, as I mentioned before, is a wide range of preservational variants. As you can see here, even within what we studied at dune beds, includes almost all of the preservational variants. We have, importantly, tiered specimens, as you can see here, going from the lower parts, expanding outwards towards the sediment surface, and then in negative relief specimens, shrinking back down again. Several include stems, which further supports their interpretation as a holdfast structure whose petalodium escaped preservation. And of course, I'm talking specifically about Aspidella and its variants here. And we see them in both negative and positive hyporelief, which allows us to reconstruct it as a biconvex sort of structure that you see right here. and then bedding collapse in several specimens. Agrees with others, such as Mapstone and McElroy, that these were probably hollow in vivo. Eoporpita itself, as mentioned before, is a low proportion of total discs, which is normal for this taxon. The lobes are circular in cross-section and flattened distally, as you can see here and in many of our specimens, which suggests that the lobes themselves were hollow in vivo. They're similar to Aspidella in size and structure, which got us wondering, could this be not a coincidence? Looking at specimens worldwide, based on synonymy from Gehling et al. And Sereznikova, we put together multidimensional scaling to using 8 different common features to see how they were related. And you can see that Hemilura and Eoporpita morphologically group separately with no overlap, but Aspidella itself covers the gap in between them and indeed covers the morphospace almost entirely of Hemilura and Eoporpita. So, what does this mean? How are they related? Well, if we just visualize this, we can see very obviously right off the bat, Aspidella and Hemilura, basically either you lose the rays through taphonomy or you never had the rays to begin with, and you get that overlap right there. But Aspidella and Eoporpita becomes a bit more interesting. As you can see, you lose certain features, but you keep important things like both of these are tiered. Both of these have the same sort of setup with a central boss with a plug in the middle and an outer disc. You see radial grooves on a number of Aspidella that are similar in spacing to the distance between the lobes of Eoporpita. So we have a lot of this in common. Well, what exactly is this telling us? Well, if we see a couple of the specimens in here, we're actually seeing what we believe to be Eoporpita inside of an Aspidella. You see a very, very just bog standard Aspidella here, but beyond a crease in this quadrant down here, you can see what were radial grooves becoming the lateral edges of these tiers. Likewise, you see an Eoporpita here with what looks to be the remnants of a membrane right there with the lobes extending out from that central boss right there. So what we've proposed here is a model for the full living organism, more complex than has originally been assumed for what was supposed to be basically just a hold-fast structure. Aspidella itself is a membranous exterior, biconvex in shape. Eoporpita itself is the preservational remains of the interior. So what we have is vertically stacked tiers of hollow, laterally adjacent lobes with the outer edges of the tiers themselves constrained by the outer membrane. So what does this mean for the preservation? Well, to get Aspidella itself, since it's so common, it's obviously not as difficult. There's several different ways you can get it. If you have death and decomposition prior to the arrival of the preserving sediments, you can have a microbial mat grow in and sort of preserve the void, but maybe not in great space. So what you see is undisturbed sediments here with a disc with some hints of the microbial mat within the disc itself. You could have the organism plucked by the turbidity current and the sediment fill in. So once again, you don't see any change in the sediment layers, but you do see a difference between the disc itself and the texture of the microbial mat. Third option is you could have it buried by the turbidity current. And with the high carbonate content of the sediments in the dune beds, you could have early cementation before full decomposition, and what you get is a negative relief specimen that shows evidence of collapse directly above the disc. And if it decomposes prior to that, you have even further collapse of the bed, as you see here, and marks and sediment features such as load structures that indicate collapse, and you have a positive relief disc. So we can get Aspidella in several different ways. Eoporpita itself, though, is much more difficult if our model is accurate, because it requires several different steps, all of which must occur for the preservation to occur. First, the stem has to be severed, exposing the internal structures. Sediment then enters into these lobes. Now, if everything inside these softer tissues, inside this tough outer membrane decomposes, then you get aspidella or you get nothing at all. However, if it manages to cement before full decomposition, you get the Eoporpita itself here. And you can see with the cross sections too, you even see hints of the sand fill of the lobes themselves, as we've pointed out here. So, what was the purpose of these lobes? Well, that's, the next question. It's a big one too. Obviously, the disc itself is a holdfast. That's been discs related to aspidella have been shown through a number of different studies to be holdfast. But beyond that, we also have multifunctionality is common biology. So we easily could say it's probably a storage function as it gathers nutrients. Possibly it stores these for hard times. It could be structural, as you have the frond in the water, as the water currents move the frond, or as the sediments itself shift against the holdfast, it could help maintain structural integrity, as I mentioned right here. And another possibility, with this sediment-water interface right here, with an oxic water column and an anoxic bottom sediments, you have the possibility that you could have chemosymbionts living inside there. You have this sharp chemical gradient, as I mentioned, an increased surface area inside these lobes for chemosymbionts to live on, and then all that oxygen being collected from the water column by the frond with its large surface area, and the plug itself possibly allowing energy molecules in. So our conclusions are that aspidella morphologically overlaps the taxonomically distinct forms Hemilora and Eoporpita. Aspidella and Eoporpita represent the external membrane and internal hollow lobes of the in vivo holdfast structure. And in addition to role in tethering the fronds, other potential functions for the disc may include storage and chemosymbiosis. And I'd like to thank these fine folks, and thanks all of you guys for coming out.